Dear Internal Audit Community of Practice members, speakers, and guests, on behalf of the World Bank and PEMPAL program, I am pleased to welcome participants from more than 20 countries on this event today. PEMPAL demonstrated to be one of the most successful networks globally and reconfirmed during the pandemic, where we had actually regular our meetings and knowledge sharing. This is, of course, thanks to all the members' active participation and our leaders of our community, as well as to our donors. And I have very positive news that European Commission joined us in November as our donor, and jointly with SECO and Russian Ministry of Finance, they are our key donors. Of course, we have also standing support by the Dutch Academy of the Netherlands. Internal Audit Community of Practice continues to work on the member countries' challenges in implementing modern and effective internal audit. We have just completed our work together with you on the CHU Central Harmonization Monitoring Unit monitoring of internal audit. Recently, we have completed the knowledge product on internal audit during COVID, KPIs for internal audit and glossary. And those all target the public sector and where there is a major demand. One of the key challenges for most internal audit functions remain managing the audit of ICT or IT, information and communication technology, including cybersecurity. This topic is vital and particularly during pandemic, as our organizations more than ever depend on the use of ICT, which provides both threat at the same time opportunities. Today, we are going to talk about how we can link and the rationale of ICT audit to the IPPF or international standards. We're going to explore new technologies internal audits are faced now and in future with the digital transformation. We all hear about artificial intelligence, machine learning, bots, Internet of Things, big data. So we're going to just open up a bit from the internal auditor perspective. We are going to also present programmatic solutions on how to deal with the challenges of IT or ICT audit, including cybersecurity. And of course, we are going to share practical examples of resources, tools, and techniques in the public sector internal IT audit. So this is all will be IT audit from theory to practice. So now I would like just to, before passing the floor to our speakers, I would like just to remind you that if you need to give our questions, please, at the question and answer session, please click request to speak button, and I trust you have selected your respective language to follow this session today. So now I would like to pass the floor to Jean-Pierre Garret, member of the Audit Progress Committee of the European Commission, Chairman of the Audit Committee of Local Governments in Flanders, and former chair of the Global IA Board. Jean-Pierre, of course, is a long-standing global expert of the PEMPAL IACOP for many years already, who is going to talk today about standards, key risks, objectives, and expectations from IT audit. Jean-Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arman. Good day to everybody, or a good evening even to some of us. Okay, good. As Armand introduced, so we will try to make a reference, in fact, to what do our frameworks, in fact, say about us specializing ourselves, without exaggerating the word specializing, into the area of IT audit, and also exploring key risks. Armand also mentioned the cybersecurity one. What are the objectives, or what could be the objectives of IT approaches to internal audit? And finally, last but not least, the expectations. So as I said, we will look into the framework. So you may jump to the next one, please. So the existing frameworks, in fact, first of all, we will cover the International Professional Practices Framework. And so the ball there is very familiar, I believe, to most of you. And as you know, the upper side of the circle, these are the mandatory components of the IPPF, while the lower one, the gray area, is in fact a very recommended one. We will pay attention to the ISPPIA, so the standards themselves. We will have a short look at the Code of Ethics and also finally at the core principles of internal audit and have a look at what do they say about the specific knowledge of IT-related issues. But we will also look at our own PEMPAL guidance. And the knowledge product here that is in front of you is the product that we built together a few years ago about the quality assessment of internal audit. And we will look specifically at those questions and guidance related to IT. Yes, please. So going back to the standards themselves, I immediately jump into the standards 1210, which is about the proficiency. So here they say internal auditors must possess knowledge, skills, and all other competencies that are needed, in fact, to perform our duties, so our individual responsibilities. And then they make a distinction between the knowledge that is supposed to be possessed by internal auditors individually or by the internal audit activity, which is the internal audit function, collectively. And so collectively, we must possess all the knowledge and skills that are needed to perform our responsibilities. But then there is a specific implementation standard there, 1210A3. So the A stands for the assurance activities. So there they say internal auditors. And so internal auditors is different from the internal audit activity, different from the internal audit function. So you can read it as every internal auditor must have sufficient knowledge of key information technology risk and controls. So that means that we should be able to identify the IT-related risks and what could be the expected controls in place to manage these risks. And the second part says we should also have sufficient knowledge, we, all internal auditors, about the available technology that can be used, in fact, to support our work. So that's about the automation here. And the automation is no longer about the management of an internal audit engagement, but it's also about data mining techniques, etc. However, they say, not every single internal auditor is expected to have an expertise of an internal audit whose primary responsibility is information technology auditing. So here we need to make a differentiation. And I think that the 80-20% rule perfectly applies here. It says that 80% of all the IT-related controls and risks should, in fact, be audited by what we call a general internal auditor. And the 20%, and that's what that sentence is referring to, the 20% are for the specialists. And so we do not expect, for instance, every single internal auditor to be capable of taking a deep dive into, for instance, the operating system. Next slide, please. If we then look at the Code of Ethics, and the Code of Ethics has specific rules, in fact, about competency. There they say internal auditors should only engage in those services for which they have the necessary knowledge and skills. So in other words, if an application, a process is almost totally driven by IT, and we do not have that sufficient IT knowledge, we should stay out of it. We should not, in fact, start with that engagement. The second one says we shall perform our services in accordance with the IPPF and with the standards. And so when we refer back to the standards on the previous slide, it says that we need to have that competency on IT. In other words, if we do not have that competency on IT and we perform our engagements, we are not only not compliant with the standards, but we are also not compliant with the Code of Ethics according to the rule 4.2. And then, of course, we should not forget the last one, which says that we should continuously, in fact, improve our proficiency. And as we have seen with the standards, the IT audit knowledge is part of that. Next slide, please. So in the last update of the IPPF, we also saw for the very first time the core principles for the professional practice of internal audit. So there are 10, but I only highlighted a few out of them. Again, it says that every internal auditor should be able to demonstrate competence, so including IT competence, and due professional care. Secondly, that we are appropriately positioned and adequately resourced. So adequately resourced means that we should have access, in fact, to these skills. If we don't have them amongst the team, we should be able, in fact, or we should have a budget, in fact, to co-source or to find a co-source provider for that purpose. And then the third one that is highlighted, we should provide risk-based assurance. So it means that we should not only have that IT-related knowledge to lead or to perform an internal audit engagement, but we should already have that when we make a risk assessment of our audit universe. Because if we don't have that knowledge, how can we then adequately assess the risks that our organization is confronted with? So the other item that I was referring to as a framework, and I believe that we can call it a framework, is in fact our own PEMPL guidance on the quality assessment of the internal audit function. And so if you look at guidance number 31, the purpose is to ensure that internal auditors possess the necessary skills and competencies to audit the IT environment. And so when you look at some of the review steps, it says, please assess whether the internal auditors possess that appropriate knowledge of the IT environment, of course, of your organization. Then if you look at step E, it says, check whether proper training on IT audit is provided to the internal auditors, either by the audit unit itself or either by the central harmonization unit. And then check whether the prescribed methodology contains sufficient and adequate guidance on IT audit. And so this is your manual, your audit manual, whether there is sufficient guidance on what to do, for instance, in an audit of, let's say, access controls. Yes, next slide, please. Okay, and then question or item number 32 relates to the use of these appropriate IT tools and techniques. So to ensure, in fact, that internal auditors are using, and not only to have, but are using the tools and techniques to support their internal audit engagements. If we look at some of the review steps, it says check whether the use of IT tools and techniques is properly described, again, in the internal audit manual. And then D, of course, it relates to the training. And so assess whether there is proper training delivered on IT tools and techniques in the training plan for internal auditors. So once a year, the European Confederation of the Institutes of Internal Auditing, they make a survey, but it's, let's say, a research survey about what are the top 10 risks that internal audit will be facing in the next year. And so now for the fourth year, we publish the results of that survey, always in the month of September, October. It's the risk in focus for 2021. Why September or October? Because this will allow the heads of internal audit to consider these top 10 risks as well when performing their own risk assessment and when developing their own next year annual internal audit plan. And so for the third year in a row, it is the information security, but now it is in the expanded work environments. Next slide, please. So what does it mean, an expanded work environment? It is in fact related to COVID-19, the pandemic. And if you remember, those of you who were present at our very first webinar on COVID-19, we also that people in fact are working out of home where they are not allowed unless for emergencies to come to the office. But of course, this brought with it a totally new concept because suddenly all the people were no longer, in fact, accessing the IT system from within the office, from within a secured environment. But now, in fact, the environment was like everybody's home. And we are not sure about how secure, in fact, all of these environments are. So again, the combination here of cybersecurity with business continuity and risk management is the top risk for 2021. Now, if this is a top risk, and this has been identified by all heads of internal audit within Europe that were interviewed, but also by the chairs of audit committees that were interviewed, we can just not ignore it. Yes. So our mandate, if you look back at the definition of internal audit, it is to provide reasonable assurance, at least on the riskiest components of our audit universe. And so we cannot ignore that the IT-related risks are part, in fact, of these top risk components of our audit universe. And why? Because most of our processes, most of our applications are driven by IT. This in comparison with 20, 30 years ago, but nowadays we also see, in fact, that the IT development in that area, and Mark later and Frank are going to talk about this as well, and Comidas. So you will hear that, in fact, that this process is even accelerating. So without looking at the IT component, we can never provide that comfortable assurance to our stakeholders. So we can even not, let's say, deliver up to what is our mission. And so IT will further dominate not only our working, but also our personal environments. And so there is no reason for us to say, this is not my area, this is the area of a specialist. No. So without a serious knowledge of IT risk and controls, we may not, but we will become irrelevant for the future. And so some efforts are needed. Okay, so these are the efforts here. First of all, we need to elevate the level of knowledge of all internal auditors and also the members, in fact, of the Central Harmonization Unit. And so this should be part of the training, not just look for the hiring of an individual who has that kind of experience. No, we should focus, in fact, on all internal auditors. We should also think about creating a center of excellence on IT. First of all, creation by the CHU, but why not to establish it within the CHU? Again, it will give a meaningful value also for the services that can be delivered by the CHU to the various internal audit units. And we can ask our own community here to develop guidance on IT audit. It's like a knowledge product which is called IT Audit Steps for Non-IT Auditors. And so if we can achieve this, I'm sure, in fact, that we will be able then to, let's say, overcome that gap that we are currently facing.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. Very interesting presentation and also your advice on the way forward. I think there will be more questions during Q&A session. Now I would like just to move and to pass the floor to Mark de Keyser to present digital transformation terminology and key concepts. Mark is an ICT internal auditor at KBC. Mark is also chairman of the executive committee of the IEA Belgium, who brings extensive knowledge in the ICT audit, guiding audit departments about disruptive technologies. Mark, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. My name is Mark. On the agenda of this short presentation, I have three elements. First of all, let's introduce the fourth industrial revolution. Where does it come from? What's in it? Then zoom deeper into the most important disruptive technologies that form this fourth industrial revolution. And then to end this presentation, we'll ask and raise the question and answer the question, is this topic of interest to auditors? So the first few slides will also be about the World Economic Forum, the WEF. You know that it's being held in Davos in Switzerland every year in January. And a couple of years ago, there was a big topic about the fourth industrial revolution with the disruptive technologies. So some of the slides I took from there, like this one, navigating the next industrial revolution. The fourth one, so we had three previous ones. The first was in the year there, 1784, steam and water and mechanical production equipment.
Mark, can you share your screen?
So here on this second slide, shortly the agenda. So three topics for industrial revolution, most important disruptive technologies, and whether this topic is of interest to auditors. So navigating the next industrial revolution, meaning we had three previous ones. The first one starting in 1784 with the steam and water mechanical production. Then the second one in 1870, the division of labor, electricity, and mass production. And the third one starting with the electronic elements in 1969. That was the year when everything started, IT, automated production. And now we are going into the fourth one, the fourth industrial revolution, and we're talking there about cyber physical systems. Now there is a big question mark for the exact year, and by reading all the different sources on internet about it, it's not really possible to give an exact starting year. It's around 2010. Some people say 2015 and so on. So it's around that period of time. So not even yet 10 years old, the starting date of this of these cyber physical systems. Now, every time that there was an industrial revolution, or every time there's even a change, you know, and certainly as auditors, we know when we have our exit meetings with our auditees, that there is some reluctance in accepting the things that we want to change. Making changes is not something that the human nature really likes, and there's always some opposition to everything that comes in new, whether it's a very small thing at your own organization, or whether it's really fundamental, like these disruptive technologies in society. We must be aware that there will be opposition and there will be protests against these things that are coming towards us. For me, a good starting point would then be January 2016. For me personally, that is also the starting of the fourth industrial revolution, because at that moment I became very much interested in all the different components. So you know that the world leaders and the economical leaders come together, and the topic they were talking about was very interesting. Big data, artificial intelligence, blockchain, robotics, virtual reality, autonomous vehicles, nano and biotechnology, material science, energy storage, quantum computing, and much more. So during that time that those people were together, it was really about telling them, making themselves aware of what is to come, and then also to start preparing for what is to come. Because if I read to you the introduction speech, but a bit summarized, of course, by the chairman of the WEF, he said, "We stand on the brink of a technological revolution that will fundamentally alter the way we live, work, and relate to one another. In its scale, scope, and complexity, the transformation will be unlikely anything humankind has experienced before." Now, if you read those two sentences carefully, well, for me, it always sends shivers down my spine. I get goosebumps when I read those sentences. It is so fundamentally what is about to come that it will change not only the organizations, but in effect, the whole society will be changed by those elements of the fourth industrial revolution. It's not just somebody who said those words. We're talking about the chairman of the WEF, That is Professor Klaus Schwab. He's the founder and the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. And he also spoke, there has never been a time of greater promise or greater peril. We do know that we have opportunities and we have threats, and both of them will certainly be part of the introduction of these disruptive technologies. Okay, if you want to read or listen and watch more, there is a video link here to YouTube, where part of this presentation is available for you to watch. The link is there. We're not going to watch it during this presentation. Okay, so bear in mind that what is going to happen in the future, and that's still the near future, is going to really change everything that we know today and in the past. Our lives will never be the same anymore. What's going to happen? Well, today's internet, we all use internet, of course, but it's going to be expanded with the Internet of Things. That's already going on for a couple of years. Lots of sensors are being connected, but if you build bigger sensors, then we can even call them robots. And so they will also become then part of that Internet of Things. And then the next step is that then also the people will become fully connected to internet and to the Internet of Things. And at that moment in time, we start using the abbreviation IoE, or the Internet of Everything. People are going to be connected by wearables. Some of you probably have already wearables monitoring your sleep and monitoring when you're out doing sports and things like that. But of course, we will also have a lot more electronical implants than we have today. We have pacemakers and things, but it will be about improving your eyesight, your hearing disabilities, and so on. There are very interesting and promising things going to be able to be implanted in our bodies. And so at one moment in time, the Internet of Everything will be simply embedded in our daily lives. We will not have to think about it. We will not have to actively connect to it. Today, we still have to take our mobile phones and start pressing some buttons and so on, but that will be all in the past. So it will be just there, and you will be able to use it any moment you'd like. It will be there without thinking about it. It's like the air we breathe. We don't think about breathing. We don't think about the air itself. At one moment in time, the Internet of Everything will be something like that, a new electronical layer around the globe. And the technological aspects of Internet will simply disappear in the background. Today, we still have disruptions, interruptions, let's call them like that. If internet is not working, the internet is always working, but then we mean, of course, that the connection to internet is not completely working. If you don't have Wi-Fi in the house, for instance, that's what we mean. Well, that will be all something of the past, because we will have redundancy and backups and so on. How long will that take before this new technological electronical earth layer will exist? Well, different sources, of course, but it's expected to take about 3 decades. So if you say that it started in 2010, it is expected to be fully integrated in society by 2040. And that electronical layer globally will then also provide a lot of functionalities. Lots of functionalities that can make use of this electronical layer, and that everything and everybody can communicate through that channel. So what then are the 16 most important disruptive technologies? These 16, this is my personal thing. I read a lot of sources, and one moment in time I started grouping them and consolidating this information. And so these 16, you will not find them somewhere on internet. This is just my way of presenting them to you. The building blocks of the fourth industrial revolution are those 4 elements. First of all, vast energy production and storage. You can imagine if we have lots of robots and a lot of electronic devices and a lot of sensors. And sensors, it's about trillions and trillions of sensors that is going to be installed and everywhere. You can imagine that we will need a lot more of energy, and we will not make it with windmills, and we will also not make it with solar panels. And you know nowadays that many countries are also considering shutting down their nuclear power plants. So there is a big question, where are we going to get all this energy from? And of course, this is one of the disruptive technologies, being that there will be ways in which humankind will be able to indeed produce more energy. If you have been lately following the news articles about that, you may have seen that we're now talking about nuclear fusion plants. So the current nuclear power plants are nuclear fission, where most of the time uranium is being used to split and then energy comes free. Nuclear fusion means basically putting two hydrogen atoms together, creating a helium atom, and also by doing that merger of two light atoms, there will be also energy coming available. So there are very promising breakthroughs going on both in the United Kingdom and in the United States by creating nuclear fission reactors in the last couple of weeks even. So that's a very interesting development there, because that would then solve the energy question that we currently have. Second building block is then what we just talked about, the Internet of Things, Internet of Everything. Currently, it's going to be based on 5G. The first 5G networks have been rolled out, but 5G is, of course, not going to be the end. There will be 6G and 7G. But 5G is different from 4G because of the fact that there is no lag time anymore. So 5G is almost instantaneous. There is no delay. Currently on a 4G network, you can do some streaming, but sometimes you do see that there is some interruptions during that streaming, and that's due to the lag time on 4G networks. With 5G, it will be, for instance, possible for a surgeon from one side of the world performing a surgery on a body on another place on Earth. Because of the tools that he uses will indeed do exactly in that split second the thing that the surgeon wants to perform. So by not having any lag time anymore, we will see a huge increase in connectivity. Also, autonomous cars driving on the highways and trucks driving on the highway, they also will be based on 5G and even other technologies to make sure that split-second reactions will be possible, so to avoid collisions and accidents and things like that. Third big block will be about 3D printing, which is also be performed already, but not massively yet. It's basically about prototyping, making small components to see how they can be best built, and then using other technologies to start mass production. While 3D will be a personalized production, but then also in big masses. We're not there yet. And that's then just for things to be created later on, much later on. Well, there are some sources that indicate that other stuff may be printed as well. We're thinking about clothing. Some shoes by Nike are already 3D printed. More clothing can be certainly 3D printed, and maybe even food. There are some chocolatiers currently who are doing some printing stuff in chocolate, but that is also just the beginning of that. 4D printing is then that's connected with material science, which will come up a bit later. But 4D printing means that you print 3D things that then can alter their shape when something happens, like time is ticking, and then the shape will also start changing, or the temperature is rising, then also that will react, the object will react to that. And also on, for instance, pressure. If you build like miniature submarines and you print them, And to perform a certain task, the deeper they get in the ocean water, the more pressure they will feel, and based on that pressure, they will then also be able to alter their shape to perform then different functionalities at the deeper water level. And the fourth one, the artificial intelligence, robotica and bots. I guess that's the most famous nowadays. Lots of things are being said to be artificial intelligent. We see some first robots. Robots and robotica are then the physical objects, whereas bots is an abbreviation from robots and robotica. And with a bot, we mean the software version of it. So the non-visible robots, software robots. The best example are the chatbots that are being worked out nowadays for help desk purposes and things like that. So far, our artificial intelligence is not intelligent, because it's artificial, and that is currently the situation. There may come a time where artificial intelligence really becomes intelligent, but that's not yet on the horizon. Artificial intelligence is about computers that can rapidly calculate scenarios that were generated during lots of tests. Think about the self-driving cars, the autonomous vehicles. They have many scenarios, and based on a certain situation, when a car drives on the highway and there's suddenly a car moving from one lane to another lane, then by calculating very fast, the car then recognizes that scenario and then also knows what to do next to stay safely on the road. And so it calculates nowadays about 5,000 scenarios per second, and that gives you a feeling of a car that is intelligent. But of course, it's not intelligent. It will not start thinking by itself to do other things than driving safely on the road. So these are the building blocks of the fourth industrial revolution. Derived technologies, well, we just named them as for transportation, autonomous vehicles. Don't only think about the cars. You will, of course, in a later time, maybe not own your own car anymore. We think that transportation will be with automated vehicles and also electrical vehicles that you can use as a service, transportation as a service. So you have your mobile phone, you just start the app, you ask, you give some parameters when the car needs to pick you up, where it has to bring you, and when, and some more parameters if you want to travel alone or in a minibus with 10 other people, and you will be transported from there to there at the right time. Because nowadays you also know when you have a car, most of the time that car just stands still, either at work or at home. And certainly now in COVID times, I have not used my own car almost at all. So there will become a time where probably cars will just pass by and pick you up whenever you want to. It's not only about cars, it's also about drones. You've heard a lot about it. And also, what is the company called again? I forget it. Amazon in the United States has now have permission from the flight administration to use drones to transport their packages to certain locations. If that is possible in the United States, it's possible everywhere on Earth. So we will see that the use of drones. That's the second big thing. And transportation as a service is the first one, and then the second one, mobility. The future of mobility is not two-dimensional, but it's three-dimensional. The drones that will be used is just one example, but bigger drones like taxis and things like that can also then become possible to transport you through the air instead of using the network of streets. Then the self-driving trucks, the self-sailing boats, the self-flying planes. We have already a long time as self-flying planes. But that will all become one big service economy. The things for living, domotica and smart cities, your own house, your own organization, the doors will automatically recognize your face and also recognize you as being you. You don't have to authenticate you anymore with a card or with a badge or with a password. Doors and buildings and houses will recognize the inhabitants, and lights will automatically go on and off. Curtains will automatically close and open, doors will open and close, and you will even be able to give instructions verbally to buildings. Probably your house where you're living will also get a name, so you can address your house, talk to it that it needs to start the oven, and the fridge that it needs to order some goods, some food to eat tomorrow or next week. So there will be, first of all, a lot of spoken instructions, but when time goes by, the houses and the buildings will become smarter, and you will not even have to give the order verbally anymore. The house will know that in the morning, for instance, you want to drive to work, so automatically the door of the house will open, and automatically the garage door will open, and automatically the car will drive outside of the garage, as long as you still have an own car, of course, because if you don't have an own car anymore, then we just discussed that. The economical systems of payments, lots of, well, we really think that the blockchain will replace the general ledgers that we now have in various places. Almost every organization has a general ledger. We're now talking about distributed general ledger across internet, and that is then typically the blockchain. And on top of that blockchain, all the transactions will be kept. So if you manufacture something and it needs to be transported to somewhere where it is also then further manufactured before it goes to the end consumer, who then does something with it. All these steps, the full cycle of a good being created, transported, sold, and used will be inside that big blockchain register, so that there is also no, being the fact that it is distributed, it cannot be falsified, because of the fact that the same truth exists in various places. On top of that blockchain, also the payment systems like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. We will still see that coming up in the next years. It's absolutely not clear whether Bitcoin will be some monetary unit that can be really used on the economical scale or global economical scale, but probably new cryptocurrencies will see the light. Also, Apple is working on that, Facebook is working on that, Google is working on that. So it's not even necessarily government driven. Probably the ECB will have their own cryptocurrency, but also big organizations can have their own cryptocurrencies. And then yes, of course, another derived technology is, then we all know that, the big data and big data analysis. That's one of these services, also from financial institutions onwards. If all the transactions are being kept on a blockchain, you can imagine how many transactions that will create. That will also be trillions. And if you then want to use that blockchain, then certain services will definitely be created by financial institutions that dig into this big data and be able to give you the information that you're looking for. Of course, big data is then also used by organizations to predict the behavior of people, to also be able to generate and create the right things that they think that you will need at a specific time. By just looking at general human behavior, they can predict what kind of tools and services people want.
Minutes, just
2 minutes?
Seven.
Okay, I'll speed up a little bit. Biotechnology, that has to do with illnesses in plants, but also in people, that will be improved. Then everything with virtual reality, enhanced reality, and augmented reality, that is going to have quite a big impact, not with these funny big looking glasses, but with very small things, probably even being implemented in the human eye. Massive online offered courses like the one we're doing now. It's a webinar, it's kind of a course. Most of the trainings will indeed become available online, and it will have much further impacts. The question of if robots are going to take over most of the work that people do today, there is many people start thinking about having a universal basic income. Now that subject is also too long to go into details here, but to wrap it up, you will then also see the nanotechnology, and especially combined with the biotechnology, that will probably have huge implications for the human body. Longevity will increase. People now are 80 years. It will maybe become 90 years, 100 years, 120 years. We'll see how that goes. Quantum computing is the next step on computing. We're not there yet. Material science is material that can heal itself. There are now mobile phones on the market. If the glass breaks after you drop your phone, the glass can heal itself. These are just the beginning. We think that many, most materials will be able to heal themselves when they break down. And you know that there is a space race going on. New Zealand, India, Japan, China, Europe, United States. So they want to reach the moon and Mars. And if people are there, a lot of services will need to be there as well. So that will also give a very great boost to economy, but on a much bigger scale then. All right, is this going to be true or not? Technological evolution is not suddenly going to come to a stop. At the contrary, it will go faster. We also now saw that with the COVID-19 pandemic. Now everybody understands what it means, exponential thinking. We saw that with the COVID. And also Moore's law, computer capacity doubles every 18 months, it comes to an end. It has been said many times in the past, but it is still true and it's still going on. So the speed of onset is incredible. Most of the steps you don't see until the last 2 steps, and then suddenly everything is there. It's called the tsunami effect, and that's true for most of these disruptive technologies. When is this going to happen? This is just an example. Nobody really knows, but yes, it is irreversible. The seeds were already planted. We have the technology available in laboratoria and so on. Is society going to survive it? The basic answer is we must be very careful here. Gartner, if you're into those things, please visit the various Gartner hype cycles per subject per year. You can see how things are evolving. And then finally, the role of internal audit. So internal auditors should provide important insights in disruption, considering the impact on the whole organization. So we are very well placed in our organizations to watch all these disruptions taking place in our organizations and the way that people deal with them. And of course, the stakeholders' expectations are valid. Are the strategic objectives aligned, and do they take these disruptions into account? Are disruptive technologies accepted in the organization? How is personnel dealing with that? How is staff dealing with it? And how are disruptive technologies being implemented and utilized? We really must seek an answer to that to be able to provide insights to the board of directors and to the executive committees. So internal audit is indeed well positioned to assess the risks that are arising from all these disruptive changes. Mind that processes are becoming more and more data-driven instead of procedural, and again with big data, and have these data risks been identified, and are they sufficiently being under control? This doesn't change our profession. That's what we do. We look for risks, and we see whether those risks are sufficiently mitigated. So disruptive change is coming. There are lots of benefits going to come out of here: safety, health, profits, and much, much more. It is a controversial subject. It's going to take another 20 years. There's a lot of uncertainty. People are maybe even afraid. Take on our role as auditors. We have to give insights to the organization, but we also can play our role in society by embracing the future and help others to prepare for this by communication, by assurance, and by joining in. That was my short presentation on the near future for the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. It was really inspiring and very interesting presentation, which scared us a bit with also the tsunami effect. And I expect more questions, a lot of questions will be coming, just to get your more insights on a few topics and concepts. Now, thanks. Now let's move, friends, let's move to the next hour's presentation, which is going to be delivered by Professor Frank Yam. Professor Yam is the chairman and CEO of Focus Strategic Group, IN's firm consulting on internal audit and IT auditing to multinational corporations. He served 6 terms as the vice president, director of ISACA International, which has, probably many of you know that it has 140,000 members in 180 countries. Frank also serves as a governor of the IA Hong Kong and certification board member of the IT certification body established by Hong Kong government. Frank is going to present IT audit resources and planning and connecting all this big reality with our IT audit role. Frank, the floor is yours.
Very good. Thank you very much again for the kind introduction, Armin. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored to be with you today to share my thoughts on IT auditing. Before I begin, I would like to thank Armin and the organizing team again for inviting me to this webinar. Today, I'm going to talk about this topic, and what I like to do is to really focus on 3 things: how we can actually embrace on the new normal. And then we'll move on to talk about IT audit resources, and I'll give a little bit of my take on IT audit planning. So there's no doubt, I think everyone would agree with me that COVID-19 has changed the whole world in a way that has never been seen in recent history. The slide here that you're seeing is showing you the figures which I talked about 10 days ago. And hopefully this covers most of the countries for the participants on this webinar. Instead of showing you the pure numbers of the confirmed cases, what I've decided to do is to show you the ratio instead. So the ratio would actually be giving you the relative reading in comparison with the population of your country. Okay, so you can see from this slide that obviously there are some countries that are doing better than others. No matter what, I sincerely hope that this pandemic will be contained very soon. However, I think at the end of the day, we must learn to embrace the new normal. So what is the new normal? Well, IIA, as you probably know, has issued a publication called Preparing for the New Normal in 2020 and Beyond. And instead of going into a lot of the details about this publication, what I like to do today is just to highlight 3 areas which are top concerns for organizations, but are very much underrepresented in annual audit plans. So as you can see, cybersecurity is the first item. And because many organizations have allowed their staff now to work from anywhere. As Jean-Pierre has talked about, if you actually work from anywhere, that means, the potential posture of your security will be quite different from where you're working in the office. So the corresponding cyber risk may not be assessed adequately. Also, almost 60% of organizations have added some type of new technologies and data security in the past year. So part of this is probably because of the COVID-19, but also part of it would be probably because of the digital transformation projects that the organizations might have been going through. Last but not least, third-party relationships. Not only that, the number of partners are increasing within organizations, but the nature and complexity of these relationships are also becoming major challenges for the organizations, but also for IT auditors. But as you can see, what I noted down at the bottom here, this is not just about COVID-19 though. There's a lot more to that. So you see a term here that I use called everything digitified. As you can see from the slide, organizations' priorities now very much focus on, first of all, keeping everyone safe, of course, but also to make sure that they focus on CEM, what we call critical event management, and business continuity planning that we have always been doing in the past. Organizations also facing challenges with a lot of new disruptive technologies. As you just heard, previously from Mark, that there are so many different kinds of new disruptive technologies, and these become major problems, for certain organizations when they're not ready to adapt to these technologies. Also, with the economic downturn after the COVID-19 has come about, in some cases, you see that this may result in layoffs for certain organizations. Now, for auditors, we must be worried about the potential increase in fraud risk because of all the economic situations, and people are probably a bit frustrated with the long delay in getting back to the normal situations that they have been hoping for. Now, in conclusion, everything is heading towards being digitified, and IT auditors must be able to keep up to date in this new digital environment. So when everything is digitified, there are certain good things, and I will explain that a little bit later. So who should we be looking for? There was a very interesting video that I actually saw from the chartered accountants for Australia and New Zealand in regards to the qualities of our future internal auditors. And after looking at this, I thought we all need to be Superman of some sort, no less, because, there are so many different qualities required of us all of a sudden. And I doubt if anyone would be able to really suit, and be able to fulfill all of these qualities. However, from my experience, what I feel is that the key to success will be how you can build teams with a mixture of the skills specifically required for your organization. So obviously, you need to have a better understanding of what are the requirements of your organization, in particularly, the business strategy and some of the tactical plans, that has been developed by your management team. As for each of the individual auditor, I would translate this key, which is spelled as KEY, as keep empowering yourself, or simply in other words, lifelong learning. You need to keep up particularly in the technology side, there are so many new things that we could, learn on a day-to-day basis. Somehow every day we hear a new term, from the internet or from our friends. On this slide, you'll see that, I put down about 40 different commonly used phrases that you'll see in the past couple of years. Just take a look, on your own, and just take a toll as to how many of these terms do you really feel comfortable with. Again, Mark in the previous presentation talked about the 16 different disruptive technologies you can add to this list. Somehow, this might sound scary to some of you who might not be very familiar with these terminologies. However, I think this is what we're getting into. And when I talk about a new normal, these are kind of things that as an internal auditor, you'll be faced day in, day out. And of course, many organizations are going through digital transformation. So everything is pretty agile, very agile. So I think, if you want to be successful and become a valuable member within your organization, the best way is to make sure that you can understand the business and IT alignment challenges that are faced by your organization. So who should we be looking for? Well, how can internal audit function effectively acquire the right IT audit resources? I suggest three potential sources. First of all, in-house auditors. The auditors, particularly the IT auditors that we already have. However, there's an urgent need to upskill and reskill. As you can see from the previous slide, there's so many new technologies and there are a lot more coming our way, which may not be something that we learn through our normal curriculum in our university days and even with our early training. You can also consider secondments from some of the other departments within the organization. In particular, the IT department would be a very good choice for IT audit resources. One of the key things is that we want to be change agent, and therefore how we can actually share best practices, something that we learn from one area of the organization, and perhaps sharing that to the rest of the organization so that everyone can benefit at the end of the day. The second sources would be by collaboration. Now, in collaboration, I would suggest that we particularly focus on other assurance functions. In particular, areas like compliance, internal control, risk management, security. Some organizations now have a different privacy function as well as quality function. And of course, if you have fraud investigation, that might be an area to collaborate as well. Now, when I talk about internal and external, that should include, therefore, the external auditors as well. How do we actually collaborate with them? Well, I suggest that you go through with them in terms of the assurance coverage and make sure that, we try to avoid as much overlap as possible so that, by working together, we'll have the best coverage of assurance for the organization. There are certain, very delicate points, of course. So, we don't have enough time to go through that today, but, there are quite a bit of challenges, and so I'm not trying to put this lightly and say that this is a very easy task to perform. The last source would be co-sourcing, which is getting people from outside to be coming in to perform the work alongside with your team. I prefer to be working together rather than just, outsourcing to them altogether. Now, which areas are the best to outsource? Probably some of the technical areas, and also areas that you do not need to do on a day-to-day basis. You only need to do it on a periodic, maybe as needed basis. Those are the best areas for you to try co-sourcing. But keep in mind that one of the key objectives of co-sourcing in here is knowledge transfer, so that after working with them for a few times, you would hopefully get your own internal auditors to be able to pick up the work and do the majority, of these engagement tasks. So look at this diagram that I have on the slide. What I'm trying to say is we must be looking at the big picture. What does that mean? This will require us to have a portfolio management approach in a real time and also in an interactive basis. Now, traditionally, we have always been dealing with auditor management, project management, and risk management. So those are our bread and butter, and we have been doing that for years. However, now, in recent years, we have been adding on some new elements to it. In particular, electronic work paper, which I guess a lot of the audit function already have, is becoming more and more mature. We also have client management, and some organizations are using, that as a system as a service. And more recently, you see that there are a lot more internal audit function moving into RPA, robotic process automation. Now, this is, sort of like the AI that, Mark has been talking about. They're not fully intelligent yet, but they're able to do a lot of the repetitive tasks that an auditor used to do, and has been proven to be very, very useful and very effective. So if you actually will be able to, develop such a system and apply that and be able to use that effectively, then what you'll find is that you'll have a very good coverage for your organization. Next is the IT audit planning. I believe most of you should be very familiar with ISACA and the COVID framework, and we are now on the version COVID 2019. In this slide, I have outlined the 4 key steps to develop a proper IT audit plan, and I don't think there's anything surprising here for any of you, because you obviously have been doing these kind of planning in the past. I would just like to point out that the key remains to be your understanding of the organization's strategy, as well as the business and operational requirements. The more you understand the strategy and also the operational and business requirements of your organization, the better you'll be able to come up with the right plan for the organization. Now, for those of you who are not quite familiar with developing IT audit planning exercise, you can go down to the source that I've listed at the bottom. This is a very good article which gives you a step-by-step sort of guide in developing a proper IT audit plan. There are certain things that I would particularly like to highlight. First of all, consider adopting an agile portfolio management approach. And what I mean by that is that you want to embrace short-term prioritization. Rather than doing it very long-term, truncate it into smaller deliverables with a much shorter-term deliverables. And therefore, you'll be able to make adjustments much, much quicker than what you'll find previously. You also need to perform regular regular review and updates, to the audit plan, so that you'll be able to mirror the changing pace of risk and assurance needs of the organization. Because again, things are moving very, very quickly with the new technological advancement these days. You need to be flexible. You want to try to assist in new projects, new initiatives, because I believe that this is the best time to build rapport and to demonstrate internal audit's real value. And not to forget collaborating with key stakeholders and building rapport and establishing trust. Those are self-explanatory, and I think many of you are already doing that. More specifically, when you're doing your annual planning, there are certain areas that I suggest you to focus on. In here, in the next couple of slides, I actually have included 4 different areas. The first area is cybersecurity, and you heard John Pierre talked about the 2 top areas that you should be focusing on is cybersecurity and business continuity, and I guess we are all in sync here. The one thing that I particularly want to remind you is that for the past 18 months, you see a very special trend moving from what we used to hear ransomware, now moving into both ransomware and also cyber extortion. For those of you who are not familiar with the differences, you can see the terms I've listed down below. This is very important because if you actually understand these, then you'll understand that there are a lot of work for the organization to make sure that they are doing the right things in the security area. Now, so first of all, because of the potential layoffs, reorganizations, the remote access by the staff, user access controls becomes a lot more important and need to be strengthened by the organization. There's also a sharp increase, as I mentioned, with ransomware and cyber extortion cases, and therefore regular data backup and recovery will be critical, and particularly the recovery. I do not see many of my clients actually going back to the data backup and retrieving the data from those backup tapes or backup disks and trying to recover the data and testing to verify that the data are actually usable. Now, this particular step is often missed in a lot of the IT procedures. So pay particular attention to that. And of course, I don't need to tell you much about focusing on GDPR and other similar kind of data privacy regulations, because that has been the focus in the EU in the past couple of years. The second area, business continuity, and this is an area that we also ties in with what now we call CEM, critical event management. We need to cover all types of critical events and incidents as indicated in this diagram, not just COVID-19, but all other kinds of incidents as well. This may be particularly critical if your business involves life and death, such as the hospital. Some of you might have heard about the German hospital with the patient died after a ransomware attack hits the hospital. So if you're in that kind of particular type of business, or maybe you're in some of the very critical infrastructure for the country, you need to be very, very careful how to plan for these type of critical event, and how do you manage these critical events after it happened. In particular with COVID-19, given that a lot of the countries are now having quarantine requirements, I really would urge you to review the policy of segregating the critical teams, because every time that someone has been confirmed on COVID-19, some of these countries would then make it a case and therefore quarantine the entire team. Now you don't want that to happen to your organization, and so that the complete process would come to a stop. So you need to make sure that you review the policy of how you segregate, particularly the critical teams. Another very common finding in the past couple of years is that many business units are now developing their own IT capabilities, because if your business unit have budgets, then you will be able to go out and source your own IT capabilities, and many of that could be now for example, software as a service. And the bigger problem with this is that these so-called IT capabilities, and if I remember like 30 years ago, we call these end user computing. These are actually outside the reach and governance of the IT department. This is the scary part of it, right? So it also becomes a big headache for IT auditors. Lastly, reviewing existing policies and guidelines to ensure that they are still relevant and effective. We're getting close to the end of my presentation. In terms of engagement planning, try to automate as much as possible. This is basically what I'm trying to say with all these things that I included on the slide here. Try to leverage as much as possible on the new technologies. Eventually, what you'll find is that it is critical to employ analytics and also the RP that I talk about, the robotic process automation, to help you really zoom in on the areas of audit interest. Jean-Pierre talked about the core principles earlier, which is to demonstrate your competence, and this is the area that you would want to make sure that not only that you're demonstrating the competence, but you're also providing the risk-based assurance. And how do you do with the risk-based assurance? By going through as much of the analytics as possible. All right. This would help you to zoom in on the areas of highest risk. Finally, I have included a number of very useful IT audit resources that you can find. One is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the USA. So they are the sort of de facto standard setting body in the US. And they come up with this cybersecurity framework, which is very, very good step-by-step guide to help you to assess your own capability, cybersecurity capability within your organization. So it's a very systematic way for you to go through this as an assessment. The second thing is what we call the OWASP Top 10 Internet of Things. And what you'll find is that with a lot of these sensors and all these other IoT that Mark has introduced to you in the last presentation, you need to help your organization to come up with some type of control measures. And this would give you a little bit of head start on what these top Internet of Things would be, and maybe later on they might have Internet of Everything later on. Finally, the third material here that you see is again from the NIST. This is called the Guide to Industrial Control System Security. The reason I include this is that in the past 2 years, I've been working with a lot of my clients, and what we're finding is that they are actually integrating a lot of the IT systems with the operational systems. Now, there's a lot of intricacy with integrating these two together. In particular, the security environment, it becomes one, and therefore your posture for security is very different. You'll also see that a lot of organizations are using what they call SOC, Security Operations Center. And by combining the IT systems with the operational systems, my suggestions, of course, is to also integrate the SOC from the two areas so that you'll have a more grand picture of the entire environment within the organization. This is something very important if you are in fact going through this kind of integration in your organization. My last slide. So after looking at all these, what's next? So I would say that it's important to embrace the new normal and reassess your skills fit. Particularly, assess your skills fit against what's needed in the future. If you want to achieve audit, then you may want to invest more in RPA, artificial intelligence, as well as recruiting digital savvy auditors. Now, some of you probably have some of these so-called IT auditors already. However, you would really have to take a look at when do they actually go to school to learn their technologies, because the technologies that they learn may be out of date already. All right? So you need to actually revisit, sort of what I call the skills database within the internal audit function. You remember what I suggested earlier, to have a mixture of the skills within the team, not one person being Superman, but rather the mix of the skills within the team would actually cover the most areas, that is needed by the organization. As Tesla's Elon Musk would say, no one really knows, the digital future, what that would be. However, your will is the most accurate way to predict the future. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to take questions later on in the Q&A session.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Frank. Very informative, lots of tips, including, yes, we need just to be Superman to just digest, and not only digest, to fly all what you have shared with us. Very useful. And dear participants, please start typing the questions in the messaging center, or you will have a chance to ask questions after Komitas, our next presentation. So now I would like to move to Komitas Stepanyan, who is the Chief Information Officer at the Central Bank of Armenia, former head of IT audit and audit committee, external member in several public sector organizations, including the Ministries of Finance. Komitas brings practical experience in advancing public sector internal audit in our region, and will try to connect all those developments with our reality. So, Komitas, please share with us your views on the preparation, the tools, and practical examples of IT audit in the public sector. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arman. Good afternoon, dear participants, dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure to be with you. It's my second or third time I'm cooperating with PenPal. I know most of you participants and most speakers. It's a great pleasure to have this chance to share something from my experience. As Arman already mentioned, I've been working as a practical IT auditor more than 13 years, and now I moved to the first line of defense, and now my previous colleagues come to audit myself. So in my presentation, in the next 20-25 minutes, I'm going to talk about several most important engagements for IT auditors. And I think each IT auditor needs to audit network, application systems, databases, and of course information, or currently it's very modern to say cybersecurity. And my colleagues, previous speakers already mentioned and already talked about cybersecurity, and I have something to add. Also, later on, I will share some tools to you which you can use during your IT audit engagement without deep IT knowledge. And at the end, I'm going to give you some practical example how to discover your network, for example. First internal audit, each audit group need to do is the network audit. I would like to refer back to my colleague Jean-Pierre, who mentioned the IAA standard about competency. On the other hand, he also mentioned that without IT competency, we cannot provide full assurance, because currently our life is more or less connected with lots of devices. All our organizations, including public sector or private sector, we are relying on IT, and network is the first and the most critical component. So we need to do IT audit for networks. We as IT auditor must assure our top management that controls are in place and our network is operating properly, securely, provide proper information to top management for later decision making. Now let's talk about practical aspects of doing IT audit, network audit. First of all, you do not need to have very deep IT knowledge. And one more time, I would like to refer back to Jean-Pierre, who said 80% of IT controls we should test, we should be able to test as general auditors, because they are IT general controls. and there is no need to have deep IT knowledge to be able to test that controls. But there are some 20% of controls which require really deep IT knowledge. Now I will talk and show you some aspects of doing network audit without deep IT knowledge, because I know that deep IT knowledge is really missing in public sector in my country, and in most countries now we have participants. First of all, as a general auditor, you need to ensure that procedures are documented, because in some cases you can see that there is a network without proper network structure, without proper documentation, without proper inventarization, without proper change management documentations. So first, in the first step, you need to understand and ensure that documents are in place, documents are updated, they are really show the actual situation, because you can find some policies which are outdated. So this is a common issue from my experience. Second most important thing is reviewing the security patches for the network software. For each network, there are lots of servers, network devices like routers, switches, etc. And these devices need to be cared carefully and on timely manner. During your sampling, you can identify critical network devices and check if they are patched on timely, because sometimes you can find some network devices which are already end of life. So the software inside that network device is not going to be updated by the service provider. This is critical issue because any outdated network device can be found by malicious users, insider or outsider or hackers, and they can identify vulnerabilities and hack your network devices. And third point is the review network cybersecurity vulnerabilities. This is also part of the second step. You need to identify if there is vulnerability scanning periodically. In many public sector institutions, they could be clear responsibility for information or cybersecurity, but in many cases you can find even there is not clear responsibility. Who is responsible for network scanning? Who is responsible for cybersecurity vulnerability checking? Because Chief Information Security Officer, of the function or the role of Chief Information Security Officer, is not very well defined in the public sector. And for that reason, you need to understand who is doing cybersecurity vulnerability check. If no one, it means your entire network can be vulnerable, and you can do that easily without very deep IT or cybersecurity knowledge. Later on, at the end of my slide, I'll show you how to do that. Next step is to identify firewall management policy, procedures, and changes. I'm more than sure many of you or you all heard about the firewall. Firewall is the most important device in our network who is the front line of our entire network. So changing the rules in the firewall is very critical and very crucial. You need to be very carefully to check all firewall rules. Who has responsibility to update that rules? Can someone change that rules without proper authorization and approval? You need to go to check the change management process to ensure that each rule is approved by the Chief Information Security Officer. There is no role for that Chief Information Security. You need to understand the top management responsibility and understanding how to change the firewall rules. Because once again, I would like to repeat, if someone changed the rule in the firewall, it means it can gives hackers from outside easily to come to check everything in your network. Next, confirm wireless networks and its security. Why wireless networks? Because currently in many organizations, you can see that people are using wireless networks. Wireless networks gives us flexibility, but on the other hand, they are very vulnerable. And sometimes in public sector institutions can use very simple devices, very small routers, very cheap routers without proper management. And for hackers, hacking most of these devices is not a big deal. My students, I'm teaching cybersecurity, penetration testing, and ethical hacking at the State University, and my students can hack such kind of routers in a couple of minutes. Next, scan for unauthorized access points. This is also very important to understand, is there any unauthorized devices in our network? Later on in my slide, I show you how to identify what kind of devices do you have in your network. Because if you do not have proper understanding what's going in your network, then we cannot talk about information security at all. Because any information you send by email or by other channels can be captured by malicious agents. And the next one, review the event log monitoring processes. Whatever you do in the network, there should be some logging. For example, if we are talking about changing firewall rules, if someone changed the rule, there should be a logging system which should log what has been changed, who changed, and what was the old value and what was the new value. So you as an internal auditor should go to the administrator who is managing the network and ask them view access to the log. And you need to carefully analyze the log to see if there is any changes in, for example, in the in non-working hours, let's say, if there is any changes done by weekends, and try to find some anomalies. Because when hackers are attacking, they are very forward-looking, and they know that, for example, in non-working hours, in weekends, our admins can be not very attentive, and they can change some rules and penetrate our systems, knowing that our controls are weak because our auditor, our administrators, security personnel are outside of the building, or they are not monitoring entire network. So these are the main steps you need to go to look at the network audit. Next audit for me as a practical auditor is the application system audit. For doing application system audit, you need to identify users, groups, and permissions. For each application, doesn't matter what kind of business service this application serves, there should be users, groups, and permissions. And you need to understand what kind of users are there. Who is the power user? Who can give permission to other users? Who is the admin of the entire application? Is there any users whose name is just a simple user, but which is in the admin group? So imagine if your admin needs to do some fraudulent activity, he can create another user and name the user whatever he wants, so ABC or just a user, and then use that particular user to do whatever he wants, because this user is in the admin group and this user has all admin privileges. So be very careful of identifying users and their permissions. This is very important. You need to understand, upgrade policies and procedures and end-of-life management, because for each application, there is a need to update or upgrade, because applications are without proper maintenance, without proper updating and upgrading policy. One day they can go end of life, and using end of life application is very risky. For example, now if you do an audit and check, for example, if one organization use Windows 7, it means this organization is already vulnerable. Why? Because Microsoft, who is the provider of the Windows, has already mentioned several times that he's not going to support Windows 7 anymore. I'm not talking about Windows XP because I know some organizations who are still using Windows XP. So any kind of application need to be maintenance based on proper security requirement, and you need to be very careful while using end-of-life application. Next is security patch management, which is also critical. Doesn't matter it's application, it's the server, the network device. So security patch management is very, very important. You need to identify if there is proper policy for security patch management and how to do that security patch management. Next is change management. For me, change management is the sign of the maturity of any organization, because if the change management process is not manageable, it means anyone can do any kind of change in any application. So you as an auditor need to understand the entire change management process, and for particular application system to check all kinds of changes, all requests of changes. Look at the approvement, who approved the changes, how that changes were implemented, did there proper testing evidence or not? If there was a change, who tested and assured that the test gave the positive result and there is a need to implement that tested application in the operating environment. Or there was some, I don't know, critical issues and the tested application didn't went to the operational process. Next is backup restore procedure. You need to be sure that for each application system there is a proper backup and restore procedure. And one more test you need to do is to be sure that backup processes, backup information tested periodically. Because one thing is when you have a backup, another thing when you're already sure that your backup can be used when there is a need. Because from my experience, I've been doing lots of application audit, and I've tested lots of backups, and I found in a couple of cases I found that backup was corrupted and there was not possible to restore from that backup. And the next is disaster recovery plan. For any application system, you need to be sure that there is proper disaster recovery plan, because such kind of events like fire or flood or any kind of physical or other kinds of risk can affect our application systems, and we need to have proper recovery plan also.
Komitas, there are 7 minutes, please.
Okay, I think I will manage. Next is database audit. For the database audit, first control is very similar to the previous one. We need to identify users, groups, and permissions, because in the database admin can do whatever they want. So you need to be sure that database admin and admin's activities are logged properly. You need to be sure that each user has proper permissions based on their business activity. And these activities are according to the need to know basics, because this is a general rule. You need to be sure that default accounts and weak passwords are properly maintained, because admins are usually very lazy, and sometimes they use default accounts with default password. For example, default account for the database, SQL database, is SA, super admin, and password is SA or SA blank or SA admin. These are very common weaknesses you need to take care. Database admins and privilege the current activity monitoring. You need to be sure that all activities are logged and you have proper log management and log viewer to look at their activities. Upgrade policy and end of life management. I have already covered this control in the previous one, which is fully the same. Change management also, what kind of changes were there, who add what kind of users, why, is there any requirement, who approved these requirements. You need to look at this. Controls and backup restore procedures. Imagine currently any application, any system use databases, and database backup and restore procedures are critical for any kind of business or any kind of institutions, organizations, or any private business. So this is also very, very important. Next, cybersecurity. My colleagues already mentioned about cybersecurity. I would like to talk about the cybersecurity from the CIA concept. You all know that CIA concept says we have three main components of information. And currently, as I mentioned already, lots of people are using cybersecurity instead of information security. We have confidentiality, we have integrity, and we have availability. But for providing these three components of cybersecurity, we have another three components: people, process, and technologies. You as an internal auditor, you need to put your attention about these three components: people, process, technologies. Without proper technologies, you cannot provide cybersecurity, you cannot provide information security. Without people component, you can have the best technologies in the world, you cannot provide CIA for the information security. And without proper processes, if you have technologies, if you have people, then without proper technologies, you cannot do that once again. So I would like to advise you to look at this triangle from that aspect. So any kind of control you are going to test from information security perspective, just look at the people, process, technologies, and you need to be sure that these three components are available when we are talking about cybersecurity. And my last slide is about the life cycle of information cybersecurity, and my colleague, previous speaker, already talked about NIST cybersecurity framework. This is a really very powerful framework. I would highly suggest you to look at, and there is actually Excel sheet with all controls and how to use this Excel sheet to do a self-assessment for your organization, or to ask someone from the information security department to do a self-assessment, and you as an auditor can do your own assessment and then do a gap analysis. And as you can see, first of all, you need to identify what you have, identify your IT assets, then think about the protection, then think about detection of any threat, then respond that threat, then recovery if the threat already affects your network. This is really, really very powerful framework. I highly suggest you to use. In the next slide, I'm going to show you some tools which are really, really very easy to use. There is no need to be IT Superman to use these tools. For example, IT network discovery, you can use deep scan network inventory tool. In the next video, small video, I'm going to share how can this software, which is available in the net, you can download using a trial period, or you can buy this software and try to identify what kind of devices do you have in your network. Because currently, lots of organizations are allowing their employees to use their own small devices like phone to connect to the corporate network. But you need to understand if your information security really knows what's going in your network. They must know what kind of devices are connected in their corporate network. Another software is Spicework Inventory, which is also very, very powerful, free tool to use. Network Inventory Advisor is another powerful tool. network risk auditor, which gives you network security auditing and configuration monitoring. You need to monitor your configurations of critical network devices, which is very, very powerful. Nessus is the free vulnerability assessment tool of more than 450 configuration templates. I have already talked about vulnerability as scanning and the importance of vulnerability scanning. So you can use this Nessus and do your own vulnerability scanning if you do not have proper information security personnel to do that. Nmap is a very good scanner for scanning network to find the open ports and services. This is very, very common used application for Linux, but there is ZenMap with graphical user interface, and you can use it in the graphical interface if you do not need if you do not know how to write some code. OpenVS is the vulnerability assessment tool for Linux users. This is a little bit complicated for general auditors if you do not have some knowledge in Linux. Accountics is a very, very nice tool. I used to use this tool for doing some vulnerability analysis in the web. If you have some web application, you can use this tool to identify lots of different types of vulnerabilities in the web, including SQL injection, XSS, etc., etc. And the last one, Manage Engine AD Audit Plus. This is powerful tool to audit Active Directory because many organizations in the public sector use Windows Active Directory domain. So you need to understand how Active Directory is configured and if it's secure or not. And in this video, you can see the use of one of the tools I've already talked about, how to use to identify your network devices. Just download this tool and install it in your computer and check in your home network, first of all. Just make some small network, take some switch, or if you have a Wi-Fi at your home and if you are connected with the mobile device, your laptop, take another laptop to have 3 or 4 devices to connect to your network and do that analysis for your network. And you can see you will find lots of vulnerabilities in your mobile device, in your personal computer, and you can use this device, this software, to identify the entire network in your corporate network. Because once again, if you do not know what kind of devices do you have in your network, if you do not know what kind of vulnerable devices do you have, because you can use Android phone which run with Android 7 or maybe 5, it means your Android device is vulnerable, and hackers can hack your Android device and through your Android device take control your entire network. So being able to identify your network devices is very, very crucial. And doing that, you do not need to be an IT expert because there are lots of free software. I'm not advertising this one, but as I mentioned already, here is the list of tools you can use easily without having an IT expert. This was my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any question you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Komitas. It was very interesting, and you provided the checklist which our internal auditors in the public sector can use as a basic reference, which was very useful. Now I open up the floor for questions. I see that some more coming. You can type in the messaging center or request to the list. I can see that the requests are coming. So first question goes to Jean-Pierre. Jean-Pierre, you were referring to the PEMPAL guidance. How will be the PEMPAL guidance on IT you just suggested?
Excuse me, Arman, say it again. How will the PEMPAL guidance?
Yes, on IT you suggested.
Yes, okay, but the PEMPAL guidance, so that's something that still need to come. I have seen many courses already where also in the public sector, where IT tools, techniques, in fact, were taught for non-IT auditors, like 50 IT audit steps for non-IT auditors. And I believe that this could be a very helpful guidance, not only for the CHUs, but for all internal auditors. And of course, all of these 50, if these are 50 steps, they can be, in fact, supplemented then with a specialized training.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre, because we can think about and work with the PayPal to develop this IT guidance for the public sector. Mark, the question goes to you. Actually, you scared us a bit with this tsunami effect. It would be already very difficult for the various users to catch up with all these disruptive technologies. How do you expect the internal auditors to cope with this?
Well, it was of course not really meant to bring a shock to you. I do hope that there is already some awareness, but if not, it's certainly a wake-up call. There is a lot of IT-related stuff coming our way in a very short period of time. The message I always bring is to create awareness more and more, and I hope that people pick up this message and share the message then again with others. Can they cope with it, or how should they cope with it? I think we will not have a choice than to cope with it, because again, most of these things will be unavoidable anyway. It's irreversible. These things are coming in one way or another. And I really hope that auditors and the way that they can cope with it is that they will move out of their comfort zone. We see that very often today, that people, they know something and they like it, and they do audit after audit within their own subject and within their own domain. But this really is a call upon all auditors to move away from that comfortable feeling and to really move into the new stuff, basically. And I always like to use the LLL abbreviation, which is lifelong learning. And again, a call upon all auditors, please do so. This is the only way ahead. Yes.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, LLL is the right way to go, and in particular for internal auditors.
Yes.
The question goes to Frank, actually. Next question is, you are talking about upskilling and reskilling, or this Superman of the internal auditor. We will always be one step behind in learning. Is this realistic, Frank?
Well, it's always the million-dollar question. People always ask me, is it easier to actually train an IT person with IT audit skills, or is it easier to train IT auditors with IT skills? It's very, very difficult to answer that. But if I have my choice, I would definitely be, getting rid of most of the current auditors and trying to rehire new ones. The reason is it's much, much more difficult to learn some of these technologies nowadays. But I think this would change over time. With the right education, and curriculum systems in the universities, I think and I hope that, in the future, this will become more of a balance. However, for those people who are already in the profession, there are a number of sources where they can actually, get these new skills. Particularly, I would suggest to rely on professional associations such as ISACA, IIA, a lot of computer societies, and even Institute of Engineers, because they are first up with some of these technologies. You can join their conferences and seminars. Take a look at their latest journals, which always give you the current trends and also the latest technologies. Looking at the standards and guidelines, and of course the white paper. And I think those are very good. Other sources would include Big Four accounting firms. They always have very, very good resources, to help, to build upon these skill sets, and not to forget, some of these vendors out there who may have very special technologies and tools that might be very useful to us. Lastly, and this is my own personal favorite, I always go back to the business units. Actually, the business units are the ones who really understand what they really need, in the future for themselves. And, once they decided, to explore certain technology, I think it's time for IT auditors to actually work with them and try to learn at the same time rather than falling behind. In conclusion, I think the key really is whether you're willing to learn or not. And I totally agree with Mark. It's the LLL. It's the lifelong learning. Really, I don't think there's a shortcut to it.
Very good. Thanks, Frank. Particularly for internal auditors looking into broader, looking at the universities and targeting how the university can provide LLL and looking into the business units, first line, second line, and looking where we can get this knowledge. And my next question actually goes to Komitas. Komitas, you brought quite a specific checklist and advice, but what will be the best approach for internal auditors with limited IT skills, as you can see, to tackle cyber security? Komitas?
Yep. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Very interesting question. Unfortunately, there is no short answer for this, and I need like another 20 minutes to cover this question. Why? Because I need once again to refer to the standards and what Jean-Pierre very clearly mentioned. If you do not have a competency, you should not go to do something which is really difficult for you. On the other hand, if you do not cover cybersecurity today, then you cannot say you are adding value to your organization. Why? Because cybersecurity is undivided part of our life. Now, what can we do? It depends on the personal wish and will. If there is a will, there is a way. This is my favorite saying. If you want to learn something, there are, how many resources are there? Particularly this event, how many people can learn a lot from this kind of events? So you need to invest. You have limited resources, okay. In my country, in our country, Arman, we have very limited resources. But if we say we have very limited resources, okay, then it means hackers will permanently and periodically hack you. And you can say, okay, I have a very limited resources. I cannot do anything. From my humble viewpoint, I can say the following. We need to invest to ourselves. Doesn't matter if we have limited resources or not, because there is no way to develop this world. Let's invest to ourselves and make this world a better place to live.
Thanks, Komitas. And we expect public sector will also need to invest in internal auditors and in this learning and broader. You are connected, please answer for your question, Irma. Irma, you need just to unmute in order to give a question. Okay, while Irma is unmuting, there is one question going back to Jean-Pierre. Jean-Pierre, if our internal auditors do not possess the necessary IT risk and control skills you've been referring, does it mean that they are not compliant with ITPF, and what are the consequences?
Okay, thank you, Harman. The question seems to be easy, but the answer is not always like that. You have to demonstrate, in fact, that you undertook all the efforts that are needed to obtain that competency. Just to say I'm a public sector internal auditor, I don't receive the budget from my government or from my minister, the head of my institution, to go on a learning trip, it is not sufficient. I believe that there are sufficient information and tools available on the internet where you can start learning. Okay, it's maybe not the easiest way. You have to search for it, but you have to prove, in fact, that you undertook all the actions that are needed. And then you know that there is always a way out of the non-compliance with the standards. You just have to report it, that you cannot be compliant with the standard because of. But to say, I'm not compliant because I didn't get the budget may not be sufficient. And as I have demonstrated there, that non-compliance is also linked with regard to competency to the code of ethics. So it does not only mean that I'm not compliant with the standards, but I also can become non-compliant with the code of ethics. And this can have serious consequences, especially for these auditors who are certified.
Thanks for those insights. Diana, do you have a question, please?
Well, Arman, thank you so much. Though actually it is not a question, just a feedback from me and from some of our participants that are writing to me in chat. And honestly, somehow we are in shock because of Mark's presentation. And on the other hand, there are many suggestions that can be brought from this workshop. First of all, I would like to mention that after Jean-Pierre's presentation, I understand that CHU somehow has to, all the CHUs have to rethink about their training program and to include more about IT. Well, this is first, and I liked a lot Frank Yam suggestion to use secondments to deal with IT audits. And despite that, we can say that there are some conflict of interest in using IT staff for IT audit. I think this is a good solution because you can learn from them and you can try to involve those specialists who are not directly responsible for that systems, let's say. And definitely, I liked a lot Komita's presentation about, and you know, it is really, let's say, the basics of what we need and how, and what, you know, the basics for us to think about and different solutions for CHUs, how to start the trainings, not only for internal auditors, of course. Thank you so much, Komitas, for different applications that you suggested. This is very much appreciated, but also about the basics of how to think about audit universe. Thank you so much, I think, and I know that our participants are really impressed by this webinar. Thank you very much. This is from my part.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you. As Diana said, and though actually Jean-Pierre proposed, we probably will need to consider for the CHU to establish a center of excellence in IT and help our public sector internal audit units to develop the basic skills and provide support. My question goes related to that to Mark. Mark, you were talking about the insights that we need to provide internal auditors insights. It was not done in the past. Do you believe we are able to do this? And will management listen to the internal auditors?
Yes, insights is not really a new word in our audit context, but it is it is in the IPPF. I do realize that I do not have to read to you the definition of internal auditing, but I'm going to do it anyway. Internal auditing is an independent, objective, assurance and consulting activity. We all know that. So there are two parts of that. There's providing the reasonable assurance and consultancy. Good. If we now look at the mission statement of internal audit that was added to the IPPF in 2017, and the mission statement is to enhance and protect organizational value by providing risk-based and objective assurance, advice, and insight. And there is that word insight. So if you compare those two sentences, objective assurance and objective assurance, it's both in the definition and in the mission statement. But then the consulting activity is being translated to advice and insight. And I do agree with that. Basically, these three words have kind of the same meaning. We provide consultancy activities, we provide advice to the business, we provide insights, okay? And the way that I look at it is that we provide insights by looking downwards in the organization to the different department heads to improve the quality of their system of internal control. But when we provide insights, that is for me something that goes to the top of the organization, that we really have to be able from our internal audit profession to provide much more relevant information to the top of the organizations and certainly to the board of directors. So did we not do that yet? I think we're in a transition phase here. And there was a past. In the past, we were inspection basically. Now we're much more indeed looking at the risks and the risk mitigation. But maybe in internal audit, there is also a future role of having a seat to provide insights at the top level management as well. And maybe when our professions and organizations get more mature, I think that will certainly be possible, given of course that we then also need to have the people in internal audit that can provide that kinds of insight. But it's definitely also for the future of internal auditing, yes.
Mark. Frank, actually, Mark was proposing just and clearly justifying why insights are more and more and becoming more and more important. Do you think that this can, or anything else we can provide convincing our management, public sector, in public sector, let's say ministers, to invest in internal audit rather than in other function agencies? How to convince management?
Just like Jean-Pierre said before, it's a very easy question, but a very, very difficult answer. Every department obviously wants to have a bigger budget, and there's no doubt about that. And I think we have all, in our career in the past, trying to get more budget and more resources, for our own department. Through the years, I have learned that, for us to be able to actually get more resources, there are three key things in my mind. Number one is to make sure that you really know your company's culture, because knowing your company's culture and knowing who are the key people within the organization that deal with these type of budget approval is important, because you need to understand what they care about, what are the pain points that they will be, really, really thinking about, and what are the strategies and maybe the goals that they're trying to achieve. That's very important. So understanding, the people and also the company's culture. The second point is making sure that you have tabulate a list of all the achievements that you have done in the past. I think, if you actually systematically going through and have a list of all these achievements that you have done, that can be able to demonstrate the value. Maybe something that you help the company to create some savings, or maybe you were able to help them to actually be more competitive in getting more business for the business unit, or in some cases lowering the risk overall for the organization. Those are very important. Very important. And of course, if you can quantify them, that would be the best. The third thing that I learned is that actually, you really need to make the business case. Not every single auditor are very good in making, business cases. And this is something that I think we need to add to our skill set. How do we make sure that we link back, to how internal audit will be able to help to achieve these business goals? And that shows, within the business case. That's important. So it's very much like a lawyer preparing for a court case in some instance. So hopefully that would give a little bit of insight.
Thank you very much, Frank. And last question, actually, so we can go to the closing remarks, goes to comitas. Like many public organization comitas are heavily invest in the IT systems. And what you would advise internal audit, because well their capacity in our region, many internal auditors, what they will need to focus during this new IT system implementation. What needs to be done first for that?
Oh, okay. Very interesting question. As a person who fan of transparency, I would like to invest in the systems to increase the transparency in the country. And I think it will help to move forward. But, it's risky to ask auditors such kind of question, because if you suggest to invest somewhere, later on, if the implementers fail, they come back to you and say, it was the either requirement or the suggestion of audit, and we invested and we failed. I can share something from my experience. When internal audits, there is a risk, you need to implement some controls, invest some software, some solution, automate some entire process, and later on, without proper implementation or without proper project management, they failed, and they came to the board and said, it was the requirement or the suggestion of internal audit, and we failed, sorry. So internal audit should be very careful for saying you need to invest here. It's much better to say we have risk here and we need properly control this risk without clearly saying we need to, I don't know, update, upgrade, or invest in another system.
Thank you very much, Komitas. Just looking into the game, going back to the risks and looking into the broader picture. So I would like just to pass the floor to Lerka Kirkovic is the chair of the Internal Audit Committee of Prague Committee. So the floor is to you, Lerka, for closing remarks.
Dear colleagues, we have gathered today virtually again for the fifth time in this unpredictable COVID-19 pandemic period. It proves again that we are more than proactive community of practice. I would like at the very beginning to thank to our presenters for their very insightful and inspiring presentations. For the first time with us are Mr. Mark Dekeister and Professor Frank Yam, and I would also like to thank them for joining us and sharing with us their thoughts on information technologies and on IT auditing. We have received today a lot of new information. IT auditing in 21st century, when technology is developing and go faster exponentially, as Mark said, is now demanding it in itself. Today, internet is expanded with the Internet of Things. There is a lot of new terms, artificial intelligence, blockchain, robotics, etc. People will be connected, as it was mentioned, to Internet of everything. In such a situation, nobody can predict the future development, and no one knows what the digital future would be. We can conclude that without any doubt, IT audit will be the top priority for internal auditors, and we will for sure continue this topic. At the end, I would like once again to thank to our presenters, PenPal Secretariat, and our dedicated translators, and to all of you, dear participants, for your participation in this event. As always, materials from this event are available on the PenPal website. According to our practice, we will be sending out an email, a survey about satisfaction with this event, and you are kindly asking to respond to that. Dear colleagues, I wish to all of you nice forthcoming holidays, and bye until next event. Bye.
Thank you very much, dear speakers. Great event, and all the participants. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.